How's it going, everyone? This is Intern Case, and if you've been paying attention to TFLnow, you might have seen the review that I did on my 2014 Mazda 3 hatch, as well as the review that I just did of my 2006 Harley-Davidson Sportster Scrambler. And I've gotten the chance to use both of these vehicles as daily drivers, and I love having them both around because there's pros and cons to each. So in this video, we're gonna go through some of the differences between daily driving a car and daily driving a bike. Let's check them out. First things first, let's talk about what both of these vehicles are like to operate. There's a huge difference in the performance of this bike and this car because this bike weighs about 600 pounds and has a 1.2 liter two-cylinder making around 70 horsepower, whereas the car weighs 3,000 pounds but only has a 2.5 liter four-cylinder making about 180 horsepower. And that really shows when you turn this bike on and watch the way that the motor shakes the entire front end. It's unbelievable. And because of that, the second that you go towards the throttle on this bike, you feel that response. And it's the same with the handling because it doesn't weigh anything. It's basically just a big rolling motor. What's one of the biggest advantages of being in a car rather than on a bike? The roof, windshield, glass. You're enclosed, which is great if it's raining, especially if it's snowing, even if it's just cold outside. And for me, a big thing is that I really don't ride my bike if I have to go more than a half hour on the highway because it's just not a great highway bike and I don't feel like getting beaten up that whole time. So being in the car for longer trips or any trips where you're gonna be going through inclement weather really makes a huge difference. And my motorcycle is especially bad about poor weather conditions because there's no back fender here. So anytime there's water on the road, all of that water and road grime gets kicked up my back, which is why my riding backpack, no matter how many times I clean it, it will always be dirty. But that being said, not a huge price to pay. I still enjoy riding even when it gets cold out here in Colorado, but the car has a clear advantage. It should come as no surprise that motorcycles don't do very well in inclement weather. But what are these vehicles like to work on? I've spent enough time working on this car, that bike, other cars, other bikes to know that I definitely prefer working on motorcycles, mostly because the parts are really cheap and really easy to install. Look how small and lightweight this wheel is. You couldn't do this with a car wheel and tire. That just makes them easier to work on. All the hardware is exposed, so it doesn't take very long to pull things apart. Matter of fact, I can pull the tank and the seat off of that bike in less than 15 minutes, easily. This car, to be honest, I don't even know where the gas tank is. There's tons of bodywork in the way, everything is complicated, there's lots of wiring. It just takes more time and more effort to get something done on your car, and it costs a lot more too. When I replaced the original front wheel on my Sportster, I spent a little over $200 on the new wheel and about $150 on the tire, which is not a bad price. When you compare it to something like the front splitter on my Mazda, which I had to replace recently, and that cost me over $500, which is hard to believe because I replaced the rear suspension on my bike and rebuilt the front forks for less than that. Another great thing about working on motorcycles is how simple the electronics are. I think the most high-tech piece of equipment on this bike is self-canceling turn signals. Besides that, I don't think there's any technology on this bike that didn't exist in the 1950s, and that even goes beyond electronics because this bike is all mechanical, like I mentioned. Even the throttle is mechanical, and It's a push rod motor, it's carbureted, there's nothing complicated about this bike, and the more complicated and difficult to figure out your project vehicle is, obviously the more time it's going to take you.
Just look at this fuse box compared to the one that's on my Sportster. I wouldn't want to be the one that has to wire all this stuff, because that level of sophistication is just going to make everything more difficult. This is some of the only wiring on this bike because it just doesn't have much in the way of electronics. And if you look a little lower, some people might call that an oil leak, but that's actually just this bike drooling horsepower.
Another advantage of the simplicity of that motorcycle is that there's not a whole lot of bodywork on it, and the whole vehicle is so inexpensive that I don't mind spray painting it myself, because it takes me a couple hours to change the color of that bike. Whereas a car like this, if you were to go to repaint this, it would be a lot of work and a lot of money. And they're too expensive for you to just go spray paint it and not really care, which is why when you get a big scratch in the side of your car like this, it's a huge disappointment, because I can't just go fix that at home with a rattle can. That would need some professional work. It might buff out most of the way, but pretty disappointing. Another great thing about motorcycles, look how little space it takes up. Seriously, this thing is tiny and I could park it anywhere, which is especially nice in a town like Boulder where parking is just awful. And because they're so inexpensive to buy and so easy to store, I could have 5 of these for every one car that I can get, which means you can really open up your options and do a lot more with bikes than cars for the same amount of time, money, and effort. What's also great about daily driving such a small vehicle, it's not just easy to park, but it's easy on gas. The most fuel I've ever put in this bike at one time is 2 gallons. It gets 30-something miles per gallon, even though it's an old school big displacement pushrod carbureted V-twin, whereas that car around town, driving it the same way that I drive this bike, gets less than 30. A clear advantage of being in a car is all the extra space you get to carry around your stuff. Look at that. I've got the trunk full of camera gear, backpacks, climbing equipment, even the front wheel from my old bike, and there's still room for 5 people up front. That's where cars really come good, because not only are they fun to drive, but they also can do everything that you need all the time. The motorcycle is more fun, but only in certain circumstances can you use it practically. Of course, you can carry more stuff on a car than you can on a bike, but I ride this thing almost every day, which means doing everyday things like going to the grocery store, picking up a week's worth of groceries, carrying all my school equipment, my work equipment, carrying extra large pizzas, and if you get a little creative, you can carry a surprising amount of stuff with you on the bike. Side note, riding with 2 huge bags is not my favorite way to ride, but for the sake of video, I might as well show you what I mean. First time that I rode with the crash pad behind me for climbing, I thought I wouldn't be able to see through my mirrors, but I actually can. I just pulled up to the pizza restaurant that I used to work at and deliver pizzas so that I could buy this bike, and I ordered an extra large pizza to go. I've actually carried home pizzas like this on the bike before, but I think it might make for a funny visual, so let's try it out again. There are creative solutions to carrying a lot of things with you on a motorcycle, but one thing I still haven't found a solution for: cup holders. Cars have them, bikes need them, And I know there are some ways that you could modify a bike to take a cup holder, but to be perfectly honest, I don't want my bike to actually have a cup holder on it. And even if it had one, I'm pretty sure with the amount that that thing shakes around, the drink wouldn't make it home. At the end of the day, the biggest advantage to having a car is that it can do everything you need to do, including carrying multiple people through good weather, through bad weather, comfortably, safely, and they're still fun to drive. The motorcycles are more fun to be on, more fun to work on in most circumstances, but there's less that they can do. Anyways, thanks for watching, and be sure to go back to TFL Car, TFL Truck, and TFL Off-Road for more news, views, and real-world reviews. Thanks for watching.